Healing in grief is more about learning how to live with your grief and trauma and loss and learning to grow around and carry it. It's not, like you said, it's not something that's going to go away. And healing for me has looked like, especially over the last 2 years, is creating a legacy. And not just, it's for me as well too, because, this is going to be my legacy, but it is also keeping my mum and dad and my brothers alive.
Hello, and welcome to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. This podcast is about exploring the grief that occurs at different times in our lives, in which we have had major changes and transitions that literally shake us to the core and make us experience grief. I created this podcast for people to feel a little less hopeless and alone in their own grief process as they hear the stories of others who have had similar journeys. I'm Kendra Rinaldi, your host. Now, let's dive right into today's episode. Welcome. Today, I'm honored to introduce Moira Khan. She is an international certified grief educator and coach and the co-author of the book Resilient AF. Originally from New Zealand and now living in Spain, Moira has turned her personal tragedy into a mission to help others after losing her mother, brother, and father within a 5-year span. She has faced significant personal challenges, and she founded Grief Span to support grievers. So I am very excited to be able to chat with Moira. Welcome, Moira.
Hi, Kendra. Thank you so much for having me.
I am so happy you're here. And we were
Yeah.
chatting right before we started to record because since you live in Spain now, I'm like, wait, how do I pronounce your name? I'm like, should I say Moira? Moira.
I know it's nice actually knowing two languages now, but it's I always love it when I come across a Spanish speaker as well.
So that is a big change, huh? Living from New Zealand to the UK.
Yeah.
So how old were you from when you moved from New Zealand to the UK?
29. So yeah, a
Oh,
while ago since I left New Zealand.
and then it's been 6 years now in Spain.
Hmm.
So how about let's start with that. Let's start about the grief regarding relocation
Oh, that's a good
because
one.
that is one that I know that when I moved to the States, I didn't even know that what I was experiencing was probably even grief. I was only 18 years old when I came, but it's one that a lot of people face. Either they relocate for work, they relocate because they get married and their spouse lives in another city. In your
Yeah.
case, it's been full on countries that you've moved to. So tell us about that.
It's a really good, I'm glad you brought that up actually, because it's not something that most people talk about. And it is grief, in a sense of if you're leaving family behind, especially, which I did. And admittedly, when a lot of Kiwis do this whole overseas experience thing anyway, because we're so far away from everything. Um, and generally, we only have like this 2-year visa, but I had a British passport because my parents were both English. So I didn't have that limitation of having to go back or, leave the UK at a certain period. So I was able to stay. And it's a good job too because I met my husband in the UK. Um, I left my mum and dad and my brother in New Zealand. So, that is a big decision in itself. And, obviously I was 29 at the time, so I wasn't as young as some that do it, which are early 20s usually. But, it's still hard. It's, I guess, 16 years ago, 17 years ago ish, I was, communications were still good. Like, we had email and everything, but we didn't have smartphones then. And, so you still kind of, we were still going into internet cafes and things like that. So, when I
That's
was
right.
traveling,
That
oh
was
my
so
gosh, I'm showing
common,
my
right?
age.
I know the internet cafes. I remember those.
I know, right? So yeah, I guess I just didn't. I was on such an adventure too at that stage because I was single. So I guess it was just this big world that I was in and exploring. And so that was my only intention to start with, because I was traveling, seeing different countries. I ended up working in London, of course, but and then it's a very different story when you find someone that you want to spend the rest of your life with, and then it suddenly shifts, right? And then you end up thinking, oh heck, am I ever going to go back to New Zealand to live, or do I, what do I do now? And it just so happened that Ali, my husband, he wasn't English, native English, so he's from Pakistan, and so he was a expat too. And and I think I was loving London at that point as well, in terms of not wanting to really go back at that point either. So, I'd sacrificed, and I also wanted to have my parents live their life a little bit vicariously through me while I was traveling as well, because they knew the UK, they grew up there. I had family that I was meeting there as well, and of my mum's side. And there was a lot of history there for me. So I was kind of in this bubble for a while. And I guess I couldn't say I was grieving at that point of missing New Zealand so much. Yes, I miss New Zealand, don't get me wrong. But I was also exploring so much of my history, which was part of the reason why I went, I guess, as well. And being able to feed back to my parents a little bit about what it was like now, and seeing family again, and all of that stuff, which they loved, because I sent so much, so many communications back and photos, and, so they loved it. So I was able to give them something back by doing it. So I guess that was joy, that
Joy,
was
yeah.
really
Now, how
nice.
often would you go back, or did they come to visit you? How often would you see them when you first
Um,
moved?
I think I was pretty lucky actually, because I went back on average at least once every 2 years, if not a little bit sooner. So I wasn't too bad actually. My parents weren't able to travel; they were sort of physically unwell, so they weren't really able to do that long trip. So I was the one that really had to go home.
Okay.
And then when I met my husband, we decided we had to get married in the UK. It was just it was something we had to do. But we did have a wedding in New Zealand as well.
So that they could be able to
Yeah,
attend. So before we hop into then how it was moving to Spain, let's pause here and talk. You mentioned right now your parents then had been ill. So eh, give us some background on your parents and your brother and your life, and then their health as well, and then we
sure.
will
Yeah.
go into this journey of the other type of grief.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess when I left home too, I kind of knew. I mean, my parents hadn't been well for a while physically. Nothing long-term illness, as in nothing terminal. So, mum was rheumatoid arthritis. Dad had a bit of a heart issue, which he had surgery for the year after I was in the UK, but he pulled through. He was fine. It was a mitral valve replacement. Multiple things that had been going on for years, but nothing for me to really sort of stop me from leaving. Um, my brother was a little bit similar too. He'd suffered some quite major health issues for over the years. Again, but nothing for me to really decide it's time to go home. And yeah, so I don't. It's so hard to cast your mind back as to how you felt at that time, because I was in such constant contact all the time as well, and looking after them from a distance. And to be honest, when I was in New Zealand, I wasn't living near them either. I was living in another city. Um, have it being I would have been able to fly an hour as opposed to 27 hours, but but it would have been, still a wee way away. But it's just that sacrifice you make when you decide to do that move. And mum and dad, mum in particular, declined for a while, between the period of sort of 2012 to 2014. She was having a couple of other surgeries. She got a really bad form of anemia, which wasn't really correcting itself. And And so I did manage to get back for her and sort of for that period as well to see if she was like, just to see her. And but then she got really sick, and I was pregnant, 6 weeks pregnant, and I don't remember thinking the time she went into the hospital. To be honest, Dad didn't tell me. It was really, he said to me, he didn't tell me the first 2 days she went into hospital. He hadn't said anything, and I was really a bit annoyed. But you know what parents are like? They just don't want to worry you. They don't, yeah. Anyway, so long story short was a few days later, she developed pneumonia. She'd gone in, just not feeling well, I think mostly with this anemia, but then she developed pneumonia. And because she had the anemia, she'd had all these drugs over the years for rheumatoid arthritis. Her organs were really struggling, and her body was really struggling to fight the pneumonia. And so at that stage, when I actually was able to speak to her in the hospital, but Dad said, I think we'll be okay. And I said, Dad, I don't know. I really want to get on a plane. And they were like, you can't, you're pregnant. And I said, I'm only 6 weeks. But Ali, my husband, was like, it's your choice. If you need to go, you need to go. So I did. And 24 hours later, I was on a plane, and I made it in time, but she passed away 48 hours after I got there. And but I mean, it was a shock because it wasn't expected, and she was only 74, and that's young in my eyes. I know she'd had a hard physical life, but she was, she wasn't that bad. I didn't foresee any of this happening. So yeah, it was that was tough. And because Dad was physically a little bit disabled at that point, he'd had trouble walking, he had neuropathy, and so he was living at home on his own, but he really did need some help. But I had to go back to the UK because I was pregnant, and I stayed 5 weeks, but I had to go back because checks and things like that with the baby. And yeah, so I had to leave, and my brother was still there. But that was the hardest part, I think. That was really hard, leaving Dad there, knowing that he was grieving. He'd lost his wife of almost 50 years, and that Christmas we wanted to go back, but because my pregnancy became high risk, I couldn't go back. So that was even more devastating for him, first Christmas without my mum. And it was really hard. That was a really hard period. And after my daughter was born in the April of the following year, that was when the grieving started.
Oh,
I think I just had
wow.
locked it away for those months, probably looking after Dad long long distance, trying to keep
Mhm.
him up, spirits up. And also I was focusing on being pregnant and, just lots of different things going on. And I just locked it away. I think I didn't grieve. But then of course, hormones and all sorts of stuff postpartum. And I just, yeah, that was when it all hit, I think. And you need your
Wow.
mum. You need your mum when you have a first baby and you expect your mum to be there. It doesn't matter where she is. You just want your mum.
Yeah, you want to be able to have that person to ask those questions, the
Mm,
person and that connection, that bond of mother daughter that you had
yeah.
just experienced, and that joy, and at the same time knowing that your own mother was no longer there, and that mother daughter connection from you to her
Yeah.
shifting or changing based on depending on how it is that your beliefs are. What were your beliefs in terms of that aspect of the connection? Were you able to maintain that connection with her after her passing?
That's an interesting question. I am a firm believer in signs and lots of connection post, in a sense of the relationships become very almost, I wouldn't say different, but almost heightened in a way. And my mum and I mean, it's quite strange. You've asked me that question because I think, not strange, but in a nice way, because I think my mum and I never
It's
really.
okay. It could be strange. I could be strange too.
No, my mum and I we weren't best friends kind of relationship, but she was such a beautiful mother, and she had so many amazing qualities. And of course, as I got older, I think I probably got closer to her because of life experiences, and appreciated her so much more for everything she was doing and had done for me as I was growing up. And so you just maturity, you you just become a bit more mature. But I think as I became a mum, I appreciated it so much more of what she'd done, and I just grasped onto every single thing that I had been taught by her to be able to do the best job I could do as a mother. Oof, gosh, I got goosebumps. Um, gosh, I've never really,
Goosebumps. Goosebumps are
yeah.
one that's for me. Goosebumps are one of those that connect
Mm,
me. That's for me. And you mentioned very science based. So this is definitely probably a question you had not thought of. So even just that fact of it,
mm,
bringing it to words, right?
absolutely.
So okay, so then continue. Sorry. So
No, no, it's
you then
it's a nice feeling though, It's
yes,
I'm at that stage now in my grief. It's 10 years since my mum passed now, and as much as I miss her so much every single day, there are so many lovely things that I see. And um, I'll give you a really nice example. On her 10th anniversary, death anniversary, last year. So my little girl, and this is the other thing too, is that I feel like my little girl Lara, who's 9 now, she will be 10 in April. She is so much like my mum as well. So that's such a lovely connection. And so on her 10th anniversary, and I talk about my mum and dad and my brother so much to the kids because I want them to have that connection with their grandparents and uncle. And Lara always knows when it's the death anniversary and their birthdays, and so does my son. So on the 10th anniversary, my little girl, at around about almost exactly the same time as when my mum would have passed, which was 9:25 at night in New Zealand. So it would have been around about sort of 8:30 in the morning here. And I may not have that right, but it's roughly. Anyway, she walks into my room. Earlier that week, I had found a photo of my mum and dad because I'd been rummaging through some photos of the time that my mum passed and the time that I was at mum and dad's house cleaning stuff out, and just, and I took some photos of her bedroom. I'm not quite sure why, but it just jogged a few memories for me that week when I was trying to remember a few more things about that period. And on her bedside, she had a lamp, and around that lamp was a little Miffy type doll, like the rabbit Miffy, and it was just a little one that was wrapped around the light. On the day of her anniversary, the death anniversary, my little girl walks in. I didn't even know I had it. I really couldn't remember having it. She walks in with this little rabbit in her hand, and she goes, "Mummy, whose is this?" And I said, "That's Grandma's." And it was exactly the same time. It was it was the thing that I had seen in this photo. Not, I'd never looked at this photo for years before this week leading up to the anniversary. It was just the most bizarre. It wasn't a coincidence. It must have been a sign. There has got to be. It's just
yes.
too much of a, yeah. It's just, yeah. I
Too
can't
much,
explain
yeah,
it.
too much. No, no, that's the thing, and a lot of times these signs, there doesn't have to be an explanation, and
No, you're right.
like it's you see it and you connect, and in that moment you feel that connection or love or remember your loved one in that moment.
Yeah,
It's whatever you make of that connection and how whatever it affects your own grief and your own mourning process, that I
absolutely.
think it's what's important. So you mentioned you think a lot about science, and I am going to ask more about your dad and your brother and the
Of
circumstances
course.
there. Thank you for sharing that story, by the way, about the little
Okay.
rabbit. Um, so did you grow up mainly believing in like, yeah, did you have a religious upbringing or spiritual upbringing, and did that shift as you got older, and what were your beliefs about death when your family members died?
Interesting. I was brought up in a Baptist. My mum was Baptist. My dad converted to being Baptist when he married my mum, and I was at church and Baptist until probably about 16. And I stopped going to church as an adult. I couldn't tell you why. It just wasn't something that resonated with me. It didn't mean I didn't believe, it just wasn't my thing at that particular time in my life. Um, but my mum had always, and she'd been a Baptist since she was a little girl. So, um, and there was lots of things that I think I was taught to believe. And I think I changed my opinion slightly after I lost my family because I went through stages, to be quite honest. I had a real crisis of faith because I thought if there was someone of a higher power, why would they take my family away? I went through that phase. Um, and if there was, if I hadn't seen a sign, why wasn't it that I hadn't seen a sign? Or, and I couldn't at that stage, I just wasn't in a good place. And so I think, and it's shifted over the years even more. And I can't honestly say what I do believe in spirit, as in religiously anymore, but I do believe spiritually about the connections and that everything that has happened in my life since I've lost my family, because a majority of it has been really lovely. And I've got to believe that a lot of that has to do with my family. And I always think that if every time something good happens and comes my way, it's my family looking after me, mum, dad, Alistair. And it's just, I fully believe that. I really do. So, like I said, it doesn't matter what I believe religiously, I don't think, but I just, yeah, it makes me feel better. It's a real grief relief, and it just gives me purpose to think that that's what's going on.
Thank you. And I know that's a really personal question. Thank you. I got teary-eyed as you were saying
Oh, I'm
about
sorry.
that. No, 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 not at all. I love, like you said, even just with the goosebumps, I love the aspect
Yeah.
of feeling every single emotion as it comes. So, but in the fact of thinking that you said when I lost my family, because it is true, it was just you and your brother. What's your brother's name? You said Lester?
Alistair.
Alistair,
Yeah.
and your mom and your dad. And so it's like the core people that knew you, your upbringing. It's like a whole chapter of your life
Mm,
and is gone. But the reason I asked about that aspect of beliefs is because I feel that there is, and you as an educator and grief coach would see that for everybody, depending on what it is you believe, it can have an effect in your grief journey depending on what it is you believe and
mm,
how you choose to either connect with those that have passed, completely shift your beliefs of what you think may happen in the afterlife, or whatever it is. There's so much that can happen. So thank you for going there and sharing candidly about
no,
your
you're
own
welcome. I'm glad you
your own
asked.
journey.
It's a really nice place to go.
Yeah, so thank you. Now, so your mom died then 2014.
Mhm.
How long after that? Was it your dad that passed next or your brother?
My brother, he died in December of 2017. I had seen him, I think it was 2016. He had been in the UK in the beginning of 2016. I think Lara was just she was about 10 months old. And Alistair actually came to the UK to visit, but at that point he was having heart issues, and he was awaiting a quite a big surgery. This is more than a mitral valve. This is quite sort of um, and he was only 40. He would have been 45 at that time. Um, this is multiple kind of issues from Marfan's syndrome, which runs in my family, which is the other version of the EDS. So we'll talk about that later. But yeah, he had multiple issues because of this, and his heart was one of them. And So he was due to have that surgery, and while he was in the UK, when I saw him, I noticed he was struggling quite a lot with fatigue and breathing, even in particular. So it was quite hard to see him like that, knowing that he was going for this major surgery, and he had that, I think, in the May or June of that year, 2016. And so that would have been that was a really long rehab for him. That was a really big surgery, big open heart surgery, in hospital for quite a while, recovery for a long time. And I did, I think I went home in the August because I had to move my dad from the actual home where he was living with mum into a retirement village to get him more care because it was that time. But I didn't see my brother at that point. He was not able to lift and do all the things to help me with the house move, so I didn't get to see him. We were living in separate towns, so it wasn't possible at that time. And I'd had to leave my little girl back in the UK so I could do this quick 10-day trip back to New Zealand to move my dad. So yeah, there's all sorts of those kind of moving parts that go on in the middle of all of this, of, long trips to back home and moving and packing up our lives and putting my dad in palliative care and all of this stuff. But anyway, so this operation of my brother's didn't work all that well, and he recovered probably about 60% of what they expected him to. And he did start going back to work, and just by sort of like part-time. And I was pregnant again in the beginning of 2017 and was due in the November. And so we moved house, we bought a house, I was pregnant again, and we had another baby, and baby came early. So my son, who's 7 now, he came early in the November. And 5 weeks later, I got a call from what was step niece, because my brother didn't have any kids. He had a relationship and a stepchild. And she called, and I was 5 weeks postpartum, and she said, Alistair's gone. And I was like, what do you mean he's gone? And she said, he's dead. He had been away from home for a couple of nights, just doing some traveling with work, and they found him in a hotel room quite early on in the morning. He'd had a massive coronary and dropped dead. So, yeah, and my dad is in care, and I'm having to call my dad to tell him that his son's died. And it's just the most horrific thing you never, ever imagine having to do. And I couldn't get my head around that. Here I am again with a new baby, another death, and I lost another member of my family, and I was absolutely devastated because I couldn't go home. I couldn't be with my dad. I'd had a C-section. I couldn't travel. I was so lucky. I had the best friends in the world. My best friend, who was living in Australia, who we'd grown up together in New Zealand, she flew from Australia to New Zealand to be with my dad so that she could support him through the funeral, while I watched it online. And it was just awful. But yeah, so that was difficult and really, really hard. And I just can't even, at that point, I was like, okay, why? What is going on? This was a huge shock. That was not expected. I had a feeling, I think I always knew that my brother wasn't going to see old age, but I didn't expect 47. That my brother really struggled mentally and physically throughout his life. He got bipolar, a lot of physical issues, like I said. And I just honestly didn't expect 47, though. That's just way too young. And a 7 years difference between us. So, yeah. So that wasn't easy. And Dad, I don't know how Dad coped. I really don't. He's lost his wife and his son, and he was amazing, to be quite honest. My dad was a very strong man, very, very stoic, very kind of old school, but so intelligent, super well read, and just so interested in everything and everyone and everything that was going on. And I think that's probably what kept him sane, because he wasn't mentally unwell. He was just physically unwell and deteriorating. His body was just giving up.
Hmm. Did
So
he
that was
have
my
a
brother.
support? Yeah. Did your dad have a support system in like, did he have friends that were still alive? Were there other family members around?
Not really.
Nobody.
My brother's fiance, I have to say, was amazing. She was going in to see him still, but like you just said, a lot of their friends had died, and
Mhm.
which is that, that awful period in your life where friends start to go, right? And a lot of the church friends that they'd made over the years in New Zealand had gone, and also dad, we actually had moved my dad from our town where we grew up to another town, which is a 7-hour drive away, to be close to my brother. This is the most ironic thing. And then my brother dies. It's just, you
Wow.
can't make this stuff up.
No.
And so then he's alone again.
Oh my goodness. And
Um,
here you are. I'm like seeing, like you said, like this duality. You're pregnant when your mom passes. You don't really express your grief once until Lara was born. Then your brother dies 5 weeks after your son. What's your son's name?
his name is Asher.
Asher, after Asher is born. So this duality of emotions in these most like joyous moments of life of
Yeah.
becoming a mom, birth, death, joy, grief, these experiences, it's just so much. So you're in another country. Yeah, that moment you're in the UK. Did you already have a support system? You had your husband. Did you have a support system around you in the UK and community to support you during that time?
Yeah, I did. We'd been there quite a few years, so we had some really amazing friends, and I still had some of Mum's family that we were quite close to. They weren't necessarily living nearby, but we were able to, they checked in with us. So yeah, we did. We had an amazing support network, and I was lucky. I mean, I kind of um, I felt for the kids at that point, because then, of course, they weren't too young to know, but it's just, how is it fair that, they've lost their grandmother and their uncle now before even having to get to the point of even knowing who they are? And it's, yeah, yeah, there are no words for that one. Um, but we were lucky. But at that time, my husband was working in Madrid anyway, and he was traveling backwards and forwards. And that was another thing too. He was traveling, and I was left left with
With
the
your
kids
kid.
for a couple of days every fortnight, and still grieving, but not really acknowledging it, I don't think.
You're in
And
survival mode of just being a new mom with
I
two
think
of
it
the
was just
two.
survival. I
Yeah.
think it really was just survival. Now I look back at it, I think I really wasn't dealing with anything, like, as in I wasn't grieving. I don't think I
Mhm.
was grieving.
Wow.
Um,
And then at what
yeah.
point then so your brother dies 2017, then your dad died a couple years after that?
So so all of this whole Spain move came into play beginning of 2018, and
Okay,
we
so a year
decided
after.
that was when we decided to go. And so we moved in the June of 2018 to Madrid. And I think, and I think I've said this to other people too, and they said, "Oh, what made you decide to go at that point when everything was going on?" I said, you know what? I said, I just needed a change. I just needed something to distract me. And you could say I was running away, but I think change, and the UK was a big reminder for me of lots of things as well, my family. And even though I had Mum's family there, it was a big trigger as well. And I just felt like if we didn't take this opportunity, then we probably may not get it again. And so that was, it was kind of a driver in a sense. Even, and Dad was still going to be the same distance away wherever I went in Europe. So um, we did it. We just put everything on a truck. We put a house with some tenants in it, and we literally drove with a truck and flew over to Madrid, and that was it. And we never looked back. And my dad was still ailing at this point, but I think it was about a year later I managed to go home, and I actually flew home with the kids on my own because he needed to be moved again into a actual palliative care wing. So this time I had to pack his apartment up, and I took the little ones home because I knew it was going to be the last time that he would actually get to meet his grandkids. And I wanted that memory for them, even if they wouldn't know. It was photos and things like that. And Dad was really bad at that stage. And I knew that when I left New Zealand 2 weeks later, that was probably going to be the last time I would see him. And anemia was really bad. He was getting regular blood transfusions. He couldn't walk anymore. He was great mentally, but he just wasn't living life anymore. And it was so hard to watch, because I watched this 6'4" of a man go from this towering giant to this, shriveled, kind of just sitting in a chair. And it was the most horrible thing to see. And I just can't get my head around that. But like I said, I'm glad that he mentally, because that was the one thing that my dad was, everyone remembers him for. And I couldn't imagine him being any other way. So I'm so pleased that he was fine when he went mentally. But it was 9 months later. 9 months later, after I got back from New Zealand, was when he went, which was Christmas Eve 2019.
Wow,
And
Christmas Eve.
again, I couldn't go home because I'd had major foot surgery. And yeah, it was just all bad timing. And I was going to go home the following year. I was planning it all because I had to wrap up all the estate and do all the, sell everything and do all of that. And then COVID hit, so I couldn't go home. So that was another. We're stuck in limbo, right? Like, it's just like, there was all these
So
periods of my life where it's been like stuck in limbo or being pregnant, and yeah, it's just been a roller coaster.
I wonder what the I don't know. Like we were saying, like some things are not coincidences, like of what the reasoning behind the timing
Mm,
of your life being these moments in which you could not travel for during that. Like I wonder what the wisdom is behind that, or if there was any or not. And if like of these limbo moments, like you said, it's like
yeah, but
so
even the
curious.
pregnancies,
It's
right? Like,
curious.
do
Yeah.
you believe in this whole? I mean, I don't know what to believe, to be quite honest. But when someone leaves and they leave someone behind to replace them, like I honestly thought at some point whether Lara was Mum's way of saying, "Here's a little girl," and my brother's way of saying, "Here's a little boy." I think my husband was saying, "Don't get pregnant again." Um,
You know what? You know what? Because then you'd have a little
yeah, I
dad,
don't want
your
any more
little
deaths on my hands.
dad. Yes.
So yeah, but I mean, that has crossed my mind quite a few times.
Well, it's also just this comfort, right, of this other being that is there to accompany you as you're losing the nucleus family which you were brought up. You're at the same time building then your new nucleus. It's just like this duality again in yours, as and like you said, like it's just you were one of four when you were growing up, and you are now one of four. You're a
Mhm.
family of four now,
Yeah,
and it's just, yeah, it is very, I don't
and
know. I
the
don't know. It's a
synchronicity
mystery.
actually of,
Yes,
me
synchronicity.
meeting my husband overseas and us doing exactly the opposite of what my mum and dad did. It's quite eerie actually when I think about it, and it's none of it is planned. None of
Yeah.
it was meant to be that way. It's just quite, yeah, it's quite eerie actually.
Yeah, it's eerie, mysterious.
Mm,
It could go either way of however it is you choose to take it, right? Or
yeah,
interpret it.
yeah.
So at this point, then, when did you start to go and dive into being a grief educator? When did you start seeking these answers for your own grief?
Hmm.
Is this after your dad passed?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It was
Take
quite a
us
while
into
after
that.
my dad passed. Would have been about 2 years, because it was about 14 months before I got the chance to go back to New Zealand to say goodbye to him, as in have a memorial for him, and, say my final goodbyes for him. So I think, and then when I got back, I hit another grief wave of, that's it now. I've got nothing left. There's not even anything left in New Zealand for me anymore, apart from obviously friends, but that's it now. I had, before was during COVID, and I had this thing of, I was having to do estate stuff from Spain to wrap it up for New Zealand, but I couldn't do all the final stuff until I got to New Zealand. And so I still had this path I was on and things to do and everything, and still a little bit of my dad left, in a sense of that I was still doing something for my family. But then when I came back and I'd said goodbye, what's left? There's nothing then anymore. So I hit another level of grief again, and I don't remember I don't remember how long it took me to come out of that, but I don't think I was very kind of I wouldn't say nice person to be around, but I was very difficult to be around. And I don't know at what point, but I think I mean I always knew that I wanted to help others in grief. I just had to get to that point where I was okay in myself enough. And it was a little bit of a journey of finding the right thing to do, as in what course to do as well, because I took a little bit of time to, research and find the right fit. And David's kind of spoke to me, David Kessler's course. And so when I did that, so it'll be coming up 2 years ago now, I qualified. And so I thought at the beginning, I thought, am I doing the right thing? Because it could be quite triggering. But you know what? It was actually the most healing thing I've ever done. And ever since then, I've been on the most healing journey, not just for myself, but obviously for other people, whilst also healing in my own grief with them. And so that's what I do on a daily basis now, is help other people heal in their grief while I'm still healing in mine. And that's incredible, and I love that, because I really have found my purpose, and it's just quite magical, actually.
Mm. Yeah. And the fact that finding your purpose from something that you wish would have not happened, yet here
Yeah.
you are with your purpose and being able to help others. When you use the word healing and the aspect of grief, what does that word mean to you when it comes to grief? Like healing, because we talk about grief not necessarily being over in especially when it comes to these aspects of grief, when it's related to a transition, like dealing with a death or other types of grief that might
Mm,
show up. There's some, like if you lost your job, you might get over that and grief that, but then
yeah.
you might be over that. But some of these major griefs just kind of shift and transform through life, but not necessarily end. So what does the word healing in your grief mean to you?
Healing in grief is more about learning how to live with your grief and trauma and loss, and learning to grow around and carry it. It's not, like you said, it's not something that's going to go away. And healing for me has looked like, especially over the last 2 years, is creating a legacy. And not just, it's for me as well too, because this is going to be my legacy, but it is also keeping my mum and dad and my brothers alive. And their legacy is important, and the more I do that, the more I heal. But of course that will never end. That healing will just keep going. And that, because you have to learn how to manage those moments where you get those grief waves. And that's the most, I don't want to say you get better at it, but because you can't expect how to feel some of these grief moments. Like I just had my brother's anniversary, my birthday, which would have been the same year that he lived too. So I've just turned the same age as what he died. And so we have this, I don't know if you know about the shadowed milestone, where you basically live in this
In this, yeah,
shadowed
yeah, because you're
space.
constantly, yeah,
Yeah, waiting for
echoing.
it's these moments of celebration where you can't, you're expecting something else to happen, or
Mhm.
it's just overshadowed by the loss of someone, or yeah. And so, that was a big one for me, because I've been waiting 7 years for that. I wouldn't say I've been waiting 7 years, but I've been anticipating. You live in this anticipation of, the anticipatory grief for this moment. And so that was a big one for me. So I didn't know how to deal with that one. I'm going to confess, I just had no idea what to do with that one. So I just had to sit with it and, lean into it and just go with it, and wait for it to pass, because it was just one of those days where I just wanted it to be over. Um, but that's just one example. And there's so many things that I now teach clients that I would never have known how to do in my own grief. And I wish I knew at that time what I could have done, because I didn't have the resources. And yes, I went through therapy, I went through counseling, I went through all sorts, but I didn't have someone who had been through something like I had to be able to educate me, to be able to sit with me, to be able to listen to me, and just be on that journey with me. And that's what I love about what I do, is because it's not therapy, but it's just being and relating.
Accompaniment. Yeah, accompaniment.
Yeah.
It's not something that we're trying to fix in that moment. We're just
Mm-mm.
really you use the word or expression leaning into it. So you're able to allow another person to lean into their grief with you and be there to hold them as they lean into their grief, not to try
Yeah.
to fix that emotion, and giving an array of tools that maybe worked for you, that may work for them or not, to be able to equip them. But just like you said, that we do not know. I say this, like, we are not even experts in our own grief. Nobody is an expert,
No.
because we literally do not know who we are going to be tomorrow, and what type of loss we're going to have tomorrow that will bring up a grief, and how we're going to navigate it then, right? So we right, but these
Yeah.
tools just aid us in that process. And maybe there's going to be some that we're like, I literally have I have a wrench, I have a hammer, I have a ruler, but none of these work in this particular moment of my life as a tool. There's going to be moments like that too. And
Yeah.
uh, yeah, like you said, the anticipatory grief of turning the age your brother was when he died, that's
Mhm.
like one that you didn't see coming.
No, you think you do, and then it's like death anniversaries and birthdays and things like that. You think you wonder how you, sorry, you think you might know how you're going to be, but it actually surprises you some days. Like, I've been through anniversaries and I'm actually okay, but it's
Hmm.
the next day that it hits me, and so you just can't predict. And so you almost have to prepare yourself just a little bit and have the space. And I always say to, some clients, especially if they're very early on in their grief, is that, you don't owe anybody anything when, if they expect you to be somewhere or turn up to something. And the best thing you can do is just give them a little bit of a heads up as to how you might be on that day or might feel, because they're not going to know that, or
Mm.
they might know, but they just don't acknowledge it because they're not sure how you might react, or, because, let's face it, a lot of people aren't comfortable sharing or talking about grief, especially if they haven't been through it. And so if you are going to be in a situation where you're on an anniversary around other people, or, and you're not at home on your own, it's just the best thing you can do is just communicate as well. And that's the thing I try and, because people aren't mind readers, and education that I work on is not just about the grievers, it's about the people that are around you as well, and teaching people how to manage other people in grief, and how
Mm.
to respond, and how to know what to say, because we just haven't, as a human race, we have not been taught, or we've just been taught just to sweep it under the carpet and carry on and
Carry on, carry on.
carry on.
Very UK,
And I
very
come from a
UK.
British family,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
it's,
Just carry on. Come on, Moira, carry on, carry
we'll
on.
make you a cup of tea, it's all right.
It's all right. And biscuits and biscuits. Moira, you said so many things there, and it's so true. And having these conversations, having the podcast, having grief educators like yourself, having talking more about death, talking more about grief gives people this opportunity to normalize their feelings and validate their feelings, which for so long we really had not been talking about that. And I see this surge of these conversations coming up even more now. Like I started this podcast 5 years ago, and when I started, I didn't really see that much of grief conversations coming up, and then all of a sudden, then whoop, it's like I see it more. Unless it's like when you're going to buy a car, and all of a sudden you see it everywhere. Unless
Yeah.
it's that, I'm not sure if that's the case, or if it's really like that. It is, but I want to make sure we talk a little bit about then your move to Spain. And I know we're trying to put a lot in this in
Yeah,
this
sorry,
time
mine is
period of
complex,
people
sorry.
listening. That your move to Spain, and that then transition of going to a country that you did not speak the language and a different culture as well. And then also then the EDS, the Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome of when you found out you had that and living with a diagnosis, how that is in your life. So you can choose which one you want to start it
Sure.
in this answer.
I think I'll start with Spain because there's something a bit of a crossover there that comes to mind about how grief is perceived here as well. And when I first moved here, of course, I'd already lost my mum and my brother, but dad was going, and I was very new in terms of Spanish language then as well. So it's taken me a long time to get to fluency, and I don't think I'm not fluent. I can't. Yeah, I mean I'm good, but I'm not fluent.
¿Qué tal si
Um,
cambiamos este episodio y empezamos a hablar en español?
no.
Let's test that fluency. I'm joking. I'm
Oh,
joking.
estoy nervioso, ¿no?
By the way, if
I
you
know.
ever do meet somebody that speaks Spanish and is grieving, my podcast does have a few episodes in Spanish too. So I do have
I
Spanish interviews.
noticed. I really want to listen to those. I'm better at listening and all that stuff and on the spur of the moment, but it's been such a journey because I don't, and I've said this before that I didn't think anything much about going to another country, speaking another language. When I left the UK, I had 3 lessons, and then I don't think I really thought too much about it, how difficult it was going to be. But I found out pretty quickly. It was, and my husband didn't speak much either. But he's picked it up a lot faster because he was working in a Spanish company, and immersion was a
And
lot
he'd
better for
travel
him.
there often. And
Yeah,
he would travel there often. So it was not
yeah,
like foreign to him to be in Madrid, right?
yeah. And he had immersion, which was different for me. I was at home with the babies, so all I had was the neighbours and trying to get around the grocery stores and that kind of stuff. And so yeah, but for me, when I guess that was probably the most, and it was a really poignant time for me in a sense because I felt like I couldn't grieve in in that country because people didn't know who I was. I didn't have any friends there, so I didn't have anyone to lean on. I was so lucky that by the about the third or fourth month, I had found a couple of friends, and I did actually throw myself into groups and mum groups, and I just really put myself out there with the hope that I would connect with the right people. And actually, we were so lucky. We had beautiful neighbors and some really interesting people that we met, Spanish and English. So we had a real mix, friends that are friends now still. And we've been so lucky in that we've ended up with a Spanish family now who, and some of them are grieving themselves, but the Spanish culture for grief is very different from what I'm used to. And so that side of it is quite different, I find, because you can't express it so much and it does just soldier on. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just the way it is. And so it's been really interesting looking at the different dynamics between the countries, especially if I go somewhere like the States and everyone wants to talk about it. And that's great. I mean, that's where most of my clientele is in the States, which speaks volumes, right? UK, not so much, Australasia, a few more, but yeah, it's been such a learning curve being here. And actually, even if I mention what I do, they ask what I do, and entrenador de duelo or luto, and they're like, I still don't understand what you do. So it's it's going to be a push, this one here, for sure. But that's okay. That's fine. I'm up for a challenge. But it's, one day I'll get there in Spanish for training, learning and educating Spaniards on grief. But maybe it's just not for me right now. But it's okay.
So you didn't have in this community, but you created your community. You seeked it. You went to groups, and like you said, you moved there right before the pandemic. So that must have
Yeah,
been a whole other thing too, because it might have taken even longer to
yeah,
create these friendships. Because if your kids weren't going to school, if
hmm
your kid, then it was longer. So that is huge. That fact that you've been able to create this community in this new country with a new language, and
yeah,
slowly and surely also then start your own thriving now business. Now, with the EDS, when did you get diagnosed, and if we can just talk a little bit of what that is, because you mentioned your brother's heart conditions were related to the Marfan syndrome,
yeah,
which is associated with that.
yeah.
So talk about that for those that are listening.
Sure. So Marfan's and Ehlers-Danlos syndromes are what they refer to as called connective tissue disorders. And so they're not autoimmune diseases. They are purely when you have a defective collagen, and which, your body doesn't produce the normal collagen that a normal makeup in a normal body would have. And so I was diagnosed in the UK when I was 29, purely just because, when I was about 30, purely just because I'd had an injury and I'd been to see a specialist, and he said, "You've got a bit of a sign of hypermobility going on." And this is nothing I'd had any indication of in New Zealand, despite having a really big back surgery when I was 12, which I now know is actually related to my Ehlers-Danlos because it was spondylolisthesis, and it's quite common in EDS patients. So when I was at the specialist, he sent me to the then guru, Professor Graham, who is the Ehlers-Danlos specialist. I think he's actually passed away now. I'm not quite sure, but he was almost in retirement when I saw him, and he was the one that diagnosed me with hypermobility HDS type 3, EDS type 3. And so it basically means that my joints wear out twice as quickly compared to the normal person. Hypermobility. I've never suffered dislocations or anything like that, but I do. Yeah, I've developed arthritis. I've got a hip replacement. I had a hip replacement surgery in 2016. Um, I have had over 10 surgeries throughout my life, but that includes, 2 C-sections. But because I had the EDS, I had to have the C-sections. So yeah, there's been multiple things that I've dealt with, and a bunch of pain. This has been years of pain and rehabs and in and out of surgeries, hospitals, all that stuff. And so that was in the UK. I got predominantly most of the diagnosis and the treatment there, which I'm really grateful for, because I don't know if I would have got it in New Zealand, to be quite honest, because the specialists and the leading people to do with this disease are in the UK, which is phenomenal. Um, so that's been, and the Marfan's is a little bit more serious in the sense of that there's things that are related that my dad and my brother had, which was the heart issues and also eye issues.
Yeah, it's like the connective tissue that supports the organs
Yeah,
themselves
exactly,
is the one that is not very strong. So
exactly.
for some, and I'm going to include myself in that, I have hypermobility. So I I believe I may be in the EDS. I've never been diagnosed, but I do have
Hmm.
hypermobility. But so yeah, for some people it might just be the joints and hypermobility there, and that would be the EDS. But for Marfan, then it's more in the connective tissue
Yeah,
around some of these organs, and then they have the
yeah,
heart failure. Or I okay,
yeah.
that's the difference
Yeah.
mainly.
in the sense that my dad and my brother had it a lot more seriously than I've got it. It's proven that it is a genetic disease in the sense that, and actually girls are more pronounced in being able and having acquired the gene as well. So there's a 50% chance that girls can develop it as well. So, and I do have it, but I don't have the other issues like my brother and my dad have. I've always been checked. I've had no heart issues or eye issues or anything like that. So I've been fortunate. I consider myself lucky because although I've been through so many surgeries and I continually get these joint issues and I have, multiple injections all the time, um, I don't have the same issues that the rest of my family had. So I can go on long walks now. I can do things. I exercise every day. But I do that. But that's the thing. I have to maintain everything so much more than the average person because for muscle strength and stabilization of all my joints, I have to have muscle strength. So I have to do weights, I have to do cardio, I have to do all of that to maintain the rest of my body so I don't break down again. So it's all a big, it's a big roller coaster.
Yeah. So no, you're constantly living in a way that's supporting your health, so that way it doesn't end up kind of breaking down even further.
Yeah.
You're living in you're in a health support. Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
supporting your
It's
health
a
by
support
being
system.
proactive. Yeah,
Yeah.
by creating the structure of your body in a way that
Hmm.
supports what you have, so that you don't have to have
Yeah.
more surgeries or things like that. Now, how is that in terms of the emotions around living with something like that? Does that affect you emotionally?
Yeah.
And have you grieved in that sense too? Does it bring up grief, or does it bring up just sadness? Like what are the emotions that come up?
I mean, I think I've dealt with this quite well in a sense of that I think it's made me stronger over the years. And that because it's one of those invisible diseases that a lot of people don't see what I go through, and that's just the way it is. But I've also tried to bring awareness of it as well. And so I feel like I don't think I'm that sad about it. It's a problem and it does affect me mentally when something does go wrong for sure. But equally, all of the things that I have to do, like the exercise, actually help me in my grief. So there's a catch-22 there, right? And there's so many things that I can take out of it as a positive as well. And then I'm more aware now of also, I don't want to label my kids as to potentially having this, but I do see certain signs sometimes and think, oh, have they got it? Has Lara got it? But it makes me more aware. And because my parents weren't really wary of it when I was growing up, I didn't get that diagnosis till later in life. And so, but there's nothing I could have really done, I don't think either on that front. So I think from my perspective, I've taken the good away from it and seen it as I've resilience. It's a resilience thing.
Yes. And
I've
resilience.
yes,
And you're using the word that, yeah, and you're using the word that I was going to ask you, that I'm really transitioning from one topic to the other very
yeah,
fast, because I do want to have a lot of
I know.
questions.
Sorry.
No, no. Thank you for sharing about EDS, because that is important. And then the Marfan syndrome, again, is just things that it's always good to hear things, because a lot of times people don't know maybe what they may have themselves. And we will be talking once we're not recording, you and I.
Absolutely.
So regarding then resilience. So
Yeah.
let's talk about this co-authoring of this book, Resilient AF. And you all know what that
Yeah.
means. You all know what the AF means.
Hmm.
Uh, so let's talk about that. How many authors are in this book, and how did that journey start of writing this book?
This began, I think it might have been about May, June last year when I'd met Blair Kaplan, who is based in Canada. And I met her through all of these wonderful grief people that I meet, grief community that I have now in the States and in Canada. And so um, when she was advertising for, writers to join this anthology, I think there's about either 40 or 50 authors in total in this anthology. And it's all about resilience, obviously. And, you basically write your story for this book, but then we had this launch in New York in January. And so we all came together, all of us resilient people, and shared our stories and got to meet each other and just have this launch in New York 3 weeks ago, which was just incredible. And for me to only have started this, I only started Grief Span literally a year ago, pretty much almost today, actually. And for all of this to happen, podcasts and writing this book and speaking events and all of this in a year has been so overwhelming but incredible, and I'm just so grateful. But to be able to have co-author a book in my first year is just, I'm so proud, but I'm also so happy for my parents and my brother, because it's their story, and that's
And
what
there's
I
the
love.
legacy. There's their
Exactly.
legacy. Yeah, the legacy continues.
Yeah, that's why I'm doing it all. And it's a little bit like what I was doing when I was in the UK for my parents, living their life for them, what would have been in the UK, maybe had they stayed there. And so I feel like I'm doing it again. And I think I will always do that. And that's just something I love doing. And for this book to be my first, it was a tiptoe for me into this. I want to write a book myself, and it's a tiptoe for me into the field of authoring and all that stuff and writing, because I've always loved writing as well. My dad was a writer; he never published, but I want to be able to do that for him as well.
That's
Um, so
amazing.
yeah, so it's only available in the US and Canada at the moment, but it's on Kindle and in paperback at the moment. So I'm
And
hoping to get it into Spanish.
can be
I'm gonna,
found in on Amazon
yeah,
or where? Amazon
just
and
on Amazon in the US and in Canada. I'd really like to get it into Spanish, because all my Spanish friends are
of
are saying, "Oh,
course.
can you get it in Spanish?" I'm like, "No, not yet, but I want to talk to Blair about that."
Yes. That yeah,
Yeah,
that would be wonderful. Yeah, all these stories. So now this is your journey as a co-author. We know now how to find Resilient AF, and how can people get in touch with you and with Grief Span and work with you? So share with us as we close off.
sure. So I'm on my biggest community. I have a really big community on Instagram, which is Griefspan Education. And on that, there's lots of links in my bio to everything, and my website as well, which is griefspan.com. And I just should probably just quickly mention Griefspan was actually a spin-off of my dad's company, Timespan. So that's why it's got so much meaning to me, and that's why it's quite personal. So I like sharing that little story, because it's a lot to do with my dad. And Griefspan does, it speaks to me in a sense of that I have a bridge as a logo, and there's lots of things that span over time with our grief, because it's forever. Um, and so yeah, so that's my main connections. I do have Facebook as well. But the community is not as active on there, which is why I talk about Instagram more. So yeah, so those are my main links. But I do one-on-ones and I do groups on request. And when things come up, I've done over the last few months things for events like unfortunate things like the LA fires and the hurricanes and things like that. We do free groups and things. I collaborate with quite a few of our our grief community, and we come together and we do things like that too, which is lovely, because we work as a team to give back to the grief community. And I think that's awesome, and I really love doing that too. So there's lots of things always going on, speaking events on Let's Reimagine. Yeah, so it's nice. I really love what I do.
That's great. So both one-on-one or groups by request,
Yeah,
and they can see everything you post and share on Instagram as well as your website, and they can buy your book as well.
yeah.
Anything that I did not ask you that you want to make sure you say to the audience before we close off, Moira?
No, I don't think so. You've asked me some amazing questions. Thank you so much, Kendra. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you so
Thank,
much.
thank you for being so open to answering them because I know I don't send any questions ahead of time and it's just this conversation that to just see where it goes. So
Oh,
it's
I
been
like that.
such a joy talking to you and learning from you. And I look forward to keeping this connection and learning from you and your community as well. So thank you, Moira Khan,
Thank
again on our
you.
podcast. Thank you. Ciao. Thank you again so much for choosing to listen today. I hope that you can take away a few nuggets from today's episode that can bring you comfort in your times of grief. If so, it would mean so much to me if you would rate and comment on this episode. And if you feel inspired in some way to share it with someone who may need to hear this, please do so. Also, if you or someone you know has a story of grief and gratitude that should be shared so that others can be inspired as well, please reach out to me. And thanks once again for tuning in to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. Have a beautiful day.